Welcome to the Chaos Project. We are excited to be here today. We have a great guest lined up for you. You guys can't believe what we're going to talk about tonight. Bear, how's it going?
Man, it's going pretty good. I had a little mishap. I was at a baseball game with my son, and I was watching him play. It was an alumni game. And we had a little propane heater, and I was changing out the propane tanks, and it caught on fire. And I was so worried about the people around me, I was worried about it blowing up. So I grabbed this ball of fire, and I start running with it.
So you thought you were Batman?
I mean, sometimes you got to be Batman, chap. You know, I mean, back me up, Chris.
And here I come to wreck the day.
Yes.
Sorry your Robin wasn't there to help.
No, you're right, though. You're right, yeah. And you do what you got to do.
I mean, it was akin to, carrying a live hand grenade. That's what I'm thinking. At least if something happens to me, my family's safe.
Well, I was, when you called and said, hey guys, look what I did. First thing I thought was, us military guys or ex-military guys or retired military guys, that hero syndrome is just built into us. You just react, that muscle memory, you react to protect.
Absolutely.
And I think that's a fantastic story. I'm sorry that your hand doesn't look as pretty as it did. I know it's going to be a painful recovery for you.
Yes, sir.
But you'll be in our prayers. And I'm really excited about our show today. We've got a retired sergeant major. I'm sure he was a pain in the behind sometime in his life. But his name is Chris. That's what I call you. I like to call you Christopher just for fun. But why don't you just tell us a little bit about what's going on? So
I'll get right into it. 21-year combat veteran, did 2 tours in Iraq. I would have to say what made me join, because a lot of people, they want to know what makes you want to join, and when you're younger. You go back to the 80s, the early 80s, so I'm dating my age. I'm kind of putting it out there a little bit. But you didn't have all this social media to where you could look to other mentors, right? My father, he worked for General Motors, and he worked the night shift so he could make more money, right? Because I get a premium working the night shift.
Right.
So for me, movies was the way I escaped. But I'd have to say, you go back to G.I. Joe and Rocky and Rambo, Commando, some of those movies from the 80s. You look back now, they look pretty cheesy.
Did you have a G.I. Joe?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. Oh, yeah. I had one too. It was great.
So that was a big thing. Voltron, I was into Voltron. So, those big protector type movies that obviously I'll go back to the comment you made earlier to Bear. And basically, the Berkman we took, him and I both took the Berkman test. It's a personality test that you take. It costs you about $1,000 to get it done. And off the charts every time, us military guys were always protectors, always number one out of all of them.
That's right.
And then, of course, service. I don't know, I always wanted to serve my country. Regardless of where we're at today, I've always felt like I wanted to do something bigger and better than myself. So that's pretty much the quick down and dirty of what got me where I am today. But I was born in Lansing, Michigan in the late 70s to a 15-year-old mother. Lived with my grandparents for a couple years. And my biological father, he actually was diagnosed with schizophrenia. So he couldn't really be a father. He had to go through a lot of stuff to help take care of that. My aunts on his side of the family basically just say you got to let him go because you're not going to be able to help take care of him and give him a life that he needs to be successful. So at that point, lived with my grandparents for a couple years, and then I ended up I shouldn't say my mother ended up meeting my stepfather, which is where I get my last name. He adopted me at the age of 6, but he came into our lives and he treated me just like a son. Didn't treat me any differently. And as I grew, we lived with my grandparents and we bounced around a little bit, but for the most part, GM, him working at General Motors, that provided for our family. And I think when I was younger, like I was a whiny brat. You know, like,
I find that hard to believe. You're not a whiny brat now, but I guess the military kind of beat that out of you, probably.
well, actually, it's going to go back a little bit farther than that. I think the biggest change in my life was when my step grandfather came into play. So my favorite grandfather, he died when I was 4. How do I remember that? Like I have a lot of memories of Gene Nichols, who was my grandfather. I to this day still think about him. There's pictures where I would hide behind things and pictures and photos, and I could look at a picture and go, I remember hiding behind that. I'm in that picture, but you can't see me.
That's really unusual for a 4-year-old.
Yeah, so he had a profound impact on me when I was really young, and then he passed away. And then quite a few years later, my grandmother ended up basically seeing her childhood, or I should say like high school sweetheart. And they ended up, getting married eventually. But there was a certain time frame. I was about 8 or 9 years old. And we ended up, like, my parents and I, like, we ended up leaving a house that we lived in, and we were looking for a house to move into. And I also have a sister, so I only one other sibling. But she's about 4 years younger than me, and we were living in the home at the time, and I just remember there was something like I was doing, and I was a brat. And my grandmother, of course, when I lived in her home when I was younger, it's like I think that's one of the worst things you could do as a child, live with your grandparent, with your mother, because the grandparent wants to spoil you to death, right? And I was the first oldest grandchild that she had,
right?
So I got spoiled, so I could get my way. And the thing is like at those ages, you know it, like once you figure it out,
right?
You just go and you keep playing to that. So my soon-to-be step-grandfather, Ernest Dingler, also served in the Army. I have a service rifle that is one serial number off of a baby grand of what he had during the Korean War. But he didn't actually make it to the war. Like he hit ground and they were done. So then they ended up coming back. But he when he saw the way I was acting with my grandmother, he pulled me aside. And he had that very direct conversation of, like, more or less, quit doing what you're doing with your grandmother. You don't need to act like that. She'll give you the world. You don't have to be a brat about it. And she's like, it's time to, like, basically it was like that man up talk when I'm like 8 or 9 years old.
Wow.
And I remember that impact. Like, I was just like, man, he's right. Like, I don't have to act like this. I can just still ask grandma, she's going to do it for me. I don't have to treat her like that.
Yeah, it sounds like at a young age, your granddad was teaching you about relationships.
Absolutely.
And the power of love and the power of respect. And to learn that at that young age, I know that set you on the right trajectory, because at that point, respect meant something to you.
Oh, absolutely. And it still obviously does today. But that, to me, that was like a profound change for me. And then, of course, as we're moving to a new school system, I was diagnosed with reading comprehension issues and ADHD, or basically back then it was ADD, according to the DSM, probably 3 or 4 at the time. So I was diagnosed with ADHD, and I could not, like, reading was horrible for me. I guess I couldn't sit down long enough to want to absorb the material. It had to be something I was interested in.
Right.
So I was in probably an IEP, individual, education plan, or special education from the 3rd grade until my 9th grade year in high school. And I think a lot of that had to do with just my energy levels through the roof. So just kind of give you guys an example of, like, my energy level. I would get on my bicycle at about 7, 8 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah.
And I would probably not stop pedaling that bike until the streetlights came on. That's how much energy I had.
So today you would be diagnosed with ADHD.
Oh, yeah, for sure.
Because you had a high levels of energy.
Oh, yeah, it was huge, right? So
I think today it'd be more like, that dude's crazy, kid. That kid crazy.
Yeah, so if you think about it, right, if you look on a map, Lansing, Michigan, if you go and look up Grand Ledge, you go look up Holt, Michigan, you go look up East Lansing, you you look up some of these like smaller towns around Lansing, they're just from 5 to 15 miles, 20 miles away, right? I would ride my bike to those towns just to do it. That's what I would do. Every like what schoolyard dirt track that there was,
You're on it.
I would make my rounds to each one of those at least once a week, you know, and that's what I would do. So that's how much energy I had. My mother finally put me in soccer. Oh, and I guess I gotta digress a little bit. So one of the biggest things I think, another big thing that my mother did for me is that when the school district was pushing for me to get put on Ritalin,
Yeah.
my mother pretty much just told me to go pound sand. She was like, you guys just want money. For you, the more kids you have on this, like Mike, he's a boy, and he's got a lot of energy. You're putting him in a classroom for 6 hours a day, and you're only giving him 2 20-minute recess periods. And like trying to explain to the school and the staff, like, this is exactly like, do you understand what he does all day when he's not in school? That's how much energy this kid has. Right. And so my mother said, no, you're not doing it. Well, we're not doing it. So in IEP, then of course that's when I got exposed to actually seeing kids with physical disabilities, mental disabilities.
Right.
Because they even though there's 8 or 9 desks in that classroom, each one of those students have their own IEP level or their own IEP that they're going through.
Right.
Plan. So some of us do way better than others, but you learn their limitations, and I think that's when I got exposed to other individuals that aren't as blessed as I was, and then you start to see the way others treat them. So we get into middle school, and so I never really cared to fight. Like, that was one of the things. I didn't care to fight people. I always wanted to get along with everybody, and I think that was the first time the school called my mother to send me home. It's because we were in the oh gosh, what's the word I'm looking for? Well, we were in one of the, like I don't want to say convention, auditorium. So we were in an auditorium, right? And there's these group of kids guys that started making fun of some of the students that I was in a class with that had physical disabilities. And I remember telling them to stop. That was the first fight I ever got into. And there's probably 3 or 4 of them, and I just went to town. And they called my mom, and my mom was just like, so why are you calling me? Well, your son got in a fight today, so you need to come pick him up. Well, can you tell me why my son got in a fight today? Like, you're saying he started it, right? Yeah, he started the fight. And she was like, well, the principal was just like, well, the thing is that someone was making fun of the other students that he's in class with. What do you mean? Some of the kids that have physical disabilities, they were making fun of them. So my mom was like, and you're calling me? How come your teacher didn't do their job? Why did my son have to step in to stop this? She's like, I'm not coming to pick up my son. That probably happened 2 or 3 times throughout middle school.
Yeah.
And then by then, like, I think between my 8th and 9th grade year, I shot up to 6 foot. I went right to my height that I am today. And everyone thought I was a senior my freshman year of high school. So throughout high school, no one really ever messed with me at all.
Right.
But that would be the next point in my life where the next thing changed. 9th grade was my last year having an IEP. I had to maintain being in special education, or I should say what they call basically a study hall, so I could do my homework. Get a start on my homework in school. So because they know Chris is going to go home and go do what? Ride his bike.
He's going to get wild and crazy.
Yeah,
he's going to go get wild and crazy.
Something, right? So pretty much like for that, I ended up being on the soccer team, spring and fall, and then I was also on the swim team, which to me that's probably what made the biggest difference because I had an energy outlet,
right?
Which I don't think if I wouldn't have done that, I would not have been as successful as I am today, and that's where I saw a big change in my ability to comprehend what I was learning in school. So with soccer, obviously, it's like you're running for 3 hours nonstop in practice. And then for swimming, we were doing 2-a-days. Okay. So
you were burning energy, and there's no doubt about that.
Yeah. So it's like 2 hours in the morning, and then it would be 3 hours in the evening. Now it wasn't. Now the swim team, it wasn't every day. Like it was the two-a-days. The two-a-days were like maybe once or twice a week, and they weren't required. They were encouraged.
Right.
So that's to me, like that's when I saw a big difference in my energy levels were low enough to where I could actually focus in school. So, and I knew that at that point, like once I figured that out, and my mother, like, you know, I go back to her knowing that I needed to burn energy. She kept me in soccer from basically from the age of like 6 or 7,
Right.
until I found other things that I wanted to do and enjoy.
Right.
Good deal.
So that for me, like that was a profound difference too. So, and then I knew at that point, college was not in the cards for me unless I actually made a sports team. And I was like, okay, the odds of actually being that good would probably go, you know, like I'm not going to count on it. So I said, okay, cool. I'm going to go back to my childhood. What I've always wanted to do since I was 4 or 5, I want to join the military.
And that's where it started.
Yeah,
Pretty much.
Yeah, pretty much. That's exactly where everything kind of like come down to. But then my senior year of high school, the summer between my junior and senior year, I decided I wanted to have a kid, which was another big change in my life. So the mother at the time, like she was graduating that year. Me, I still had a year left. I quit the swim team, and then of course I had to pay child support. So I ended up working 3 jobs. And how did I do that in school?
That's
Energy.
energy.
A lot of monsters.
Energy. Yeah.
So they had a work program that I could do. So I worked construction for Sunway Builders, which is no longer in existence.
Right.
We built condominiums and custom homes. Pretty much I worked there from 6 o'clock in the morning until noon. And then I would go to school from 1 until 3. And then I would leave school and then go to McDonald's. Or I would end up going to Richter's Gardens or some other job that I was kind of rotating through at the time in high school. So I learned a lot about like gardening, grass seed, all those crazy things. I learned how to like frame, build. I could do a wood basement like with a blindfold on right now if I had to, because we did so many of them. And of course, the one place I didn't care to work at was McDonald's, but it was steady and they always needed someone to work. So that's pretty much like my high school time frame. I hung out with a group of guys that were all great. One of them joined the military. He served 20 some years, just like I did. And we were both stationed in Hawaii and at Fort Riley together. And we actually saw each other in 2007 when we were in Iraq. So basically, I hung out with a great group of guys. And it was very diverse. So that's probably like where, for me, I went to an inner city school.
Right.
And I think the diversity, that's kind of where you go back to that, you know, like when you're in the military, like especially as Army guys, everyone's green, right?
Right.
And that's kind of like I've already kind of got that. So one guy was from the Middle East. Another guy was pretty much like, I should say the twins I hung out with, which one of them joined the military, was French and Japanese. And then the black fellow we hung out with, like he lived right downtown, but we were like the oddball group that hung out with each other, but it's like it was so diverse. And then you had your typical Brian Spillners or Paul Walkers,
Right.
That hung out with us too, but it was a good mix. And I think that's where I learned more about culturally and like racially, like those things kind of just like went away.
Well, it's interesting when you are thrown into an environment where diversity isn't really an option. It's just a reality. You know, we look at how people are and we say, you know what, we're going to work together. We're going to learn together. We're going to do some things together. I'm not going to allow all this other silliness keep us apart. And when I was in the Marine Corps, of course, it was a little bit longer ago. I can remember the first day I got to boot camp. They cut my hair and all that mess. But my first morning waking up with 85 other people, all right, it was weird. And immediately I was in a place that I was uncomfortable. And there were people that were very different than me. They didn't look like me. I didn't grow up in an environment where diversity was really an issue. There was none. There just was none.
Right.
And I quickly had to learn, these are the guys I'm going to go to battle with. These are the guys that are going to be an encourager for me, and I'm going to be an encourager for them. So this idea that we need to separate ourselves because of different concepts of life, I find non-productive. And it sounds like so did you.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
I have a great friend group, right? I mean, and I consider both of you guys friends. Man, what I started doing, you know, when I introduced friends of other friends, right? You didn't know the guys that were at the house, you know, this past Saturday. Whenever I introduce somebody now, I try to find those commonalities. I'm like, you know, my buddy Scott was a huge car guy. I know you're a huge car guy. You know, and I started that conversation out, hey, Chris, this is Scott. Scott, this is Chris. Right, y'all are both huge gearheads, right? So you automatically have something to fall back on if the conversation goes down a different path. You're not worried about egos or the differences. You're just worried about the commonalities, man. We're here for the same thing, a good time. We're here for fellowship, right?
Right.
So, yeah, I mean, it's I've served with a lot of guys that were different than me. I mean, you know, but you got to find those commonalities. And it sounds like you had a great base, you know, from your grandfathers teaching you, you know, how to do that, what to be a man, you know, how to be a man. This is what a man is. This is how you should handle those situations from your grandmother. And I do have another question for you. When you said you decided to have a kid, was it one of those surprises?
Oh, it wasn't decided. Yeah.
Okay.
It was absolutely a surprise. Yeah, that's something you don't plan on doing. But you definitely grow up quickly. And you reprioritize everything. So, you know, while everyone else is like going off to college,
right,
and basically blowing $200,000 for a piece of paper and partying with their parents' money at that time.
Right.
Yeah.
It's what was I doing? I was working multiple jobs, construction, sales. I even managed an ice cream parlor restaurant for a period of time. I worked as a bell valetman, and I was basically like I always wanted to join the military, but I didn't join until I was 20 because I had this son, and I didn't want to leave him. All right. Well, there were some things going on with the mother, and I was able to get granted temporary custody. So I'm like, all right, great. So I go for permanent custody, and I join the military, and they would not let me remove domicile, and I lost custody, and I was already signed up. So back then, you go back to the 90s.
Yeah.
They didn't have those laws in place where they could say, hey, because he joined the military, you can't hold that against him. So that's in place now, at least in the state of Michigan, it's now in place. But it's good. I didn't have that, and I just remember at the time. So I was saved when I was about 19 years old, and for me, like I looked at it like, okay, is this what God wanted? Like, you know, is this the path? You know, and I look at it, and I still look back to this day, and I go, I don't think my son was necessarily here for me. I think he was here for his mother. I think his mother needed him. So I got married because that was part of the situation, and I would say that was probably another life-changing thing. Is that when I had custody, I had gotten married, joined the military, and I would tell anyone, don't get married young. And the reason why I would say, I tell my daughters this all the time. So I have two daughters, and then I have a late son. And I'll get into the part of my son, losing my son. But I look at it like, you are so ambitious at that age that trying to raise a family and be ambitious to try to get ahead, that as a man, you are so busy that all you want to do is provide and be able to retire at a decent age so you can enjoy your older years with your grandchildren, right? And be there and provide for your family. And that's kind of where I was at, like with my wife at the time. She it was devastating to her when we lost custody of my son, because she had grown attached to him over the year and a half that we've been together. And so she was pregnant when we were in Hawaii. So my first duty station was in Hawaii. And of course, you don't want to go to Hawaii for your first duty station when you're in D3, 4. It's a little expensive.
It's a very expensive place.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, back then, a gallon of milk at the commissary was like $4 a gallon.
Wow.
So it still wasn't cheap. But I mean, with that, it's like you learn really quickly. You're like, man, like you're so focused. And she actually went to the Inspector General's office to file a complaint because she wanted me to do a hardship discharge. And of course, you know, years later, and we'll talk about some of my military history.
Yeah.
The Inspector General is required, like when someone files a complaint, well, you file it on behalf of your husband. So they called me up. I had to go in there, and like I got my chain of command. They're like, "Why is the IG calling to talk to you?" And I'm like, "That's a great question. I have no idea what."
So you didn't know you didn't know she did it?
No, I didn't. She went down there and she filed a 1059.
Oh my goodness!
And then I'm getting a phone call, and the chain of command's like, "What are you doing? Like, what did we do something that you're not telling us about?" I'm like, how about I go there and figure this out?
Go find out.
Right.
Absolutely.
I'm a PSC at the time, and I'm just like, let me go figure this out, okay? And I walk in there, and I'm by myself, and they're talking to me. They're like, yeah, your wife came down and filed like paperwork saying that she's like, well, she wants to know like what's up with your hardship discharge. And I'm like, wait, what? Hardship discharge? And they're like, yeah, like she said that you lost custody of your kid, and that you want a hardship discharge. And I'm like, okay. I'm like, and this is where this was the hard decision. Could I have done a hardship discharge due to losing my kid over how hard it was on me? Yeah, I could have played the victim card.
Sure.
And went down that path. But I darn well knew that I was not going to work at General Motors the rest of my life. That was not the life for me. I appreciate everything that like the automotive industry gave to my family growing up. And it was great work for my stepfather who adopted me, like, and his whole family. Like,
right.
He's got 6 other brothers and sisters.
Right.
And most of them went and worked for General Motors. My grandfather on that side was a foreman at General Motors. And it was like, yeah, could I get in the door?
It's a family business.
Yeah, without a doubt, right?
Yeah.
And I was just like, I couldn't do it. I'm like, I could not sit there and go like this, take apart, put it on a car, take apart, put it on a car all day long. I'm like, well, let's go back to my
That'd been
childhood.
prison. That'd been prison to you.
Right.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You and your ADHD stuff. I can just see him now.
Yeah.
And look at that. I'm all Jody myself.
And that's where I was at. I was like, I can't go do that. I'm like, this will devastate me. And it was. In my mind, it was going to be prison. Yeah. And I'm like, no, I'm not doing that. Like, there's just, no, we're not going down that path. And she was upset about it. And I think for her too, she was pregnant, getting ready to have our first daughter, and she, I think, wanted to be closer to mama. Which
Absolutely.
So that's a whole nother dynamic to this understanding of don't get married young.
Right.
All right. It was because now, especially if you're moving away from family, because for her, now that she's getting ready to have a kid, she wants to be close to mom because mom can help nurture, can help educate, can help bridge a gap of someone for her to be there with. And when we were in Hawaii, we really didn't have anybody that we could lean on. And you go back to the family readiness group, and you know the deal with that, brother. Like how the wives are treated, like the mother, like the commander's wife thinks because the commander has the rank,
she wears that rank.
She wears that rank and treats everybody in the FRG that way.
Yeah.
And that's kind of like the exact same thing, at least with the first commander I had.
Right.
In that it was, anyway. So we can move on to talking about more or less this whole piece of like being young. And I'm telling you, like I would tell anyone, go out there as a man, figure out who you are, get yourself situated.
That's right.
And no time is perfect. I understand that. And it's just like the 1/3, 2/3 rule in planning. Everything can't be perfect, but get that ambitious bug to the point where you're like, okay, I have time for a family.
Right.
Now. And so I've told my daughters, I'm like, look, not that I don't want you to get married, not that I don't want you to be with a man. Don't do it until you're 30. Why is that? Well, 9 times out of 10, a man, he's not even ready to be a man until he's about 25 to 30 years old.
Right.
I'm like, and on top of that, there's a reason why the military recruits, their focus group is 18 to 25 years old.
Yeah, they're trainable.
Right.
Because you didn't know what you were really going to do.
Well,
when
I
you're
can
20.
indoctrinate you into what I need you to be as a soldier.
Right. Exactly.
Right? You know, and that's where they focus. And on top of that too, your mental and your physical, like your cognitive development for males don't finish out until you're about 25 years old.
Correct.
Right.
So they can still mold you to what they need you to be.
Right.
And I think that's why a lot of us military, like guys that are successful when we come out, it's because we had someone instilling like task, purpose, goal setting, all these things in our life that when we moved away from that, we still have that that drive because it was like instilled and indoctrinated into us.
Right.
But for me, like that was another piece. I look back and I go, man, I have a failed marriage, and a piece of that's because of I didn't put enough focus on my marriage. I was focused on let's be successful.
Right.
And with that too, like that was also around the same time frame that I was. I didn't tell her this. She found out, but I was starting to go for selection. So it's because I always wanted to go that route. I had a lieutenant that he went OCS, but he was an E7, and he was an operator.
Right.
And so he was able to work with us mortarmen a lot. And he did a lot of kill house stuff with us. He did a lot of quick reaction drills, all these all these things to help.
Cool guy stuff.
Yeah, it was a blast. And then all the ruck marching we did in Hawaii, I probably got about 1,200 miles on my boots. I've had to resew the same boots. Like I told my wife, my current wife, I want to bronze them.
Yeah.
Nice.
And put a plaque on them. Like so that's, but that's I put a lot of miles on those boots. But it's you go back to that time frame, and there was just so many things going on. And so many in my life, there's so many things that were going on in my life that, like, I put focus where I shouldn't have put too much focus into. But I did it out of ambition and wanting to take care of my family, which is one thing men like to do. It's like, I have a family to take care of.
Right.
And it's like, now you're not always going to be young. So when's the time to get after it?
Right.
When you're young.
Absolutely.
So you can hopefully coast down the road a little bit.
But most young men don't think they're not going to be ever young again. They all think I'm going to be young forever. They really do. I remember I was young once, and obviously it didn't stick. But being young is a beautiful thing, and here's what's really crazy, Chris, and I think you could probably back this up. I bet Bear can back it up too. Many of the things that the military taught me and did to me, and how they made me think when I was in my early 20s. I'm in my early 60s now, and I still am kind of programmed from that. It didn't go anywhere.
Right.
For better or, hey guys, for better or for worse, it didn't go anywhere. And it's funny to me how military guys, and I've been around them all my life, military men, they just kind of collaborate differently together. And I think it's exactly because of what you just said. That very precious time in your early 20s, we all kind of went through the same role plan.
It's formative. It's operant conditioning.
And so we can always bounce back to that moment in a time, and that's our common stuff. That's how we can get together and even with war and all these other things that make us tribal. The one thing, it was 40 years ago for me. All right. But I can still remember, and as you're sitting here talking about it, I'm thinking, oh man, yeah, me too.
Right.
Me too. And I think that's one of the reasons we get along so well. We think, in many ways, we all think the same way. And I think that's part of it because we all went through that beginning together, even though it was 30 years different.
Birds of a feather. I mean, I try not to hang out with pieces of shit. So I mean, that's one thing we all have in common. We're less than 1%. If you want to put it, making Sergeant Major, that's a huge, huge accomplishment. I mean, I myself got out as an E8, and I was chomping at the bit to make Sergeant Major. God had other plans in store for me, but less than 0.2% make Sergeant Major. We talked about this before, brother. Yeah. So, man, that's a huge accomplishment. And, man, I just love being able to learn from you guys,
Well, we are today who we were. We add all the life experiences, and that's who we are. And so I think it's fantastic that the military had a piece of that formation, but your grandmother had a big piece of that formation. Your grandfather, who kicked your behind at 8 years old and said, "Man up." I think our young men today could use some kicking in the butt. And, that's kind of why we do this show.
Absolutely.
We want to remind dads it's okay to buck up and be a man. And so, man, I love your story. Keep going. Don't stop. You're taking me back places I haven't been in a while, and it's kind of invigorating me.
So Hawaii was your first duty station. You're going through an IG complaint at somebody else's behest, right? And that's
which was my wife. So let's just get into it at the time, not my ex-wife. But
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
So you're going through all that. What's next?
I'll back up just a little bit. So 1997, I joined active Army. I actually signed up in 96. But I got in a motorcycle accident. Yup, I'm one of those guys that the recruiters hate. I got in a motorcycle accident the day before I was supposed to ship out. So
he messed up his numbers.
Yup. So I got set back a whole other year because I broke my ankle.
Wow.
I didn't break. I think I sprained my ankle. So I have some ligament issues with my ankle. Yep. He walked up that day and I could hear him knocking on the door, and I had to get up and go tell him, and I'm in crutches, and he's like, "You got to be kidding me right now." And I'm like, "No." I got into motorcycles at 19. So a big motorcycle guy. I love anything with wheels. So it's pretty much where a skateboard, bicycles, scooters, whatever it was. As long as they had wheels, I was down with it. So I joined in 97. 96, I was supposed to ship out to be a combat engineer. The guy that actually was working with me to recruit me was dating my aunt. And he was a prior operator, Delta Force guy. And he was like, "This is the path you should go." He kind of told me some of the things I need to do. He was trying to help mentor me. He goes, "If you really want to go down this path," because at a young age, so I'll back up even farther. I remember when, oh my gosh, what was that movie called? Not Navy SEALs. There was another movie that came out with Ed Harris in it. The Abyss, I think is what it was called. And there was
The Abyss was a good movie.
Yeah, there was a Navy SEAL in it, right? And I remember just going, man, what is a Navy SEAL? What is this guy, And so I started doing a little bit of research, and then of course, at the time you come across Richard Marcinko books,
right?
You start reading them.
Oh yeah, Rogue Warrior.
Oh yeah,
man, these are you're okay, yeah, this is awesome. So and then of course Navy SEALs comes out. It's still Hollywoodized. It's not really what it is, but it gives you a taste of some of the stuff. You don't understand Hell Week, right? And of course we had a Hell Week on the swim team. We had to swim 10 miles. I think it was 10 miles in a day. But that was our Hell Week. There would be things we did. But and I remember looking that up. I joined the Navy Sea Cadet Corps when I was 15 because I wanted to be a SEAL.
You want to go that way?
That's right. So these are things I kind of missed that go back to this whole I'm joining the military, right? So I'm building up. So part of me wanted to join. I joined the Navy Sea Cadet Corps because you could actually keep your rank up to, I believe at the time was E6. So if you stayed in and you got all the testing done, because you take the exact same test that they take.
Really?
Yes. So I ended up, I did that for only a year. And it's what turned me off is when I finally talked to, a frogman. He was like, well, you have glasses. Because if you had glasses after you made it through,
right,
you'd be fine. He was like, going through the training to get there, he's like, they're not going to let you do it. So then I was like, crap, what the heck am I going to do now?
And they didn't have LASIK then.
Nope, they didn't. So I was like, okay, well, I'm not going to be a frogman, and of course that's, and I'm trying to be respectful of them because that's typically what they're called. They don't call them SEALs.
That's right.
Operators or frogmen. So I was like, okay, so I'll fast forward back to my aunt and the boyfriend that was an old Delta Force guy, and he goes, man, you can do that with glasses. You can go to Ranger school.
Oh, yeah.
Go to airborne school. He goes, we'll get you through. He goes, no big deal. So that was kind of like the path I was heading down. And of course, I broke my ankle or sprained my ankle on a motorcycle accident, and then got married, got custody. I tried to get custody of my kid, and shipped out for infantry. So the first time I was supposed to ship out, I was supposed to be a combat engineer, and then I ended up going infantry. And of course, they give me the X-ray identifier. So I'm like, but everyone else was a Bravo. Yeah. All the X-rays either became hotels, which was the Humvee guys, which I think they got rid of that one. The Mikes were the Bradleys.
Yeah.
And then, of course, the Chucks or the Charlies were the Mortarmen. And at the time, I was like, man, I do not want to be a Mortarman, right? I'm like, that's not what I want to be. But that's what I ended up being. Yeah. Got to Fort Benning, hit ground, went through reception. And, of course, they fatten you up for the kill.
Sure.
For shark thing.
Oh, yeah.
Shark attack.
Oh, yeah. No doubt.
You all up, and then you show up, at Sand Hill, and then they're doing their thing. But and then that's when I found out you're going to be a mortarman. And I was like, man, no, that's not what I want to be. But I'm like, you know what? I'm going to embrace it.
I'll do it well, and I'll do it well.
Exactly, and that's the way I was. And of course, what I found out, so when we were going through our AIT portion, we ended up having to go over and be Op 4. So for any of those that are watching and don't understand what Op 4 is, like you're the opposition force to another force. So we're helping to train up the Bravos, which are the basically the door kickers. And so that's when I found out, so I still get to do all the fun stuff with the Bravos, and I can still learn some of these other tactics that they learn. So I was like, so I'm getting kind of the best of both worlds.
Right.
But they got to do it on a full-time basis. So it was one of those things I was like, I'm just going to embrace it and suck it up. So I go through training, and then I graduate, and then get shipped out to Hawaii. That was part of my contract. I was actually contracted to actually get time in Hawaii. I had a buddy of mine that ended up going to Hood for the first year and a half.
Wow.
But then he had to extend his contract
to go to Hawaii.
To get Hawaii. Right. I went directly to Hawaii.
Right.
So it worked out really well. I hit ground, and then I had my squad leader at the time was David DeCrescio. I believe he was from out like the LA area, and I was blessed with a lot, and I'll talk through some of my leadership. I was blessed with him because he was really down to earth. He understood a lot of stuff. And how to treat people, relationships. He didn't always jump into, you screwed this up. It was more or less always one of those, let's take a step back.
Right.
What'd you do wrong? What'd you do right? He would walk you down that path instead of just going, I'm going to knife hand you to death and smoke the hell out of you.
Right.
And, try to beat it into you.
Right. Teaching you how to do it right.
Yeah.
How to analyze. I think the hardest part sometimes is how do you learn how to analyze?
Absolutely.
We don't teach people how to analyze problems now. We teach them to plug it into Google, and Google will give you the answer.
Yeah. Chat GPT.
Another show. Another show.
So with that, I got a lot from him. I was treated right, got some good principles, lessons learned, and I think so. My first year on ground in Hawaii, I went to air assault school, knocked that out, which it's not hard. It's just get through it. You just got to do it, right?
Right.
probably the hardest thing is doing the ruck march. But ruck marching for me was at long legs.
You liked it,
and I enjoyed ruck march. I go ruck today, like you know. So I really enjoy ruck marching. So weight never bothered me. And then, of course, later that year, we had our first chance at the EIB, which is the Expert Infantry Badge, which I believe at the time was like 40 combat tasks with multiple subtasks that within each one of those tasks that you had to do in order to achieve this, right? So this is like, when there's no combat, this is like the holy grail for the infantryman. Right. This is, you want to get this, and this helps you out with promotion.
Right. Absolutely.
It shows that you're on it. Right.
You're a master of your craft.
Yeah. Exactly. So of course, being there's only a couple of us mortars, we get, and it's what they do is they have a team leader or they have a squad leader that runs you through the train up for it, and it's whoever already has one. So no one in my squad or my section, the mortar section, had one. So what do? They attach me to, a Bravo squad that's going through because this one guy had one. I can't remember his name to save my life because I didn't really interact with him too much other than that time frame. And he was one of the guys that when I first got there, one of the NCOs was an E6, that he was always one of those E6 that was running around like looking for you, like doing something wrong so he could smoke the hell out of you, right?
You got bullied as a kid?
Probably did, right? So, but for the most part, he embraced me coming on board, right? And for 2 weeks, we trained up, and we started going through EIB. And each one of his guys, no go.
Man.
No go. And he comes, it's like, and I'm still there, right? And of course, it always comes down to like one main event. The one that always takes, it's like, this is the one that if you don't pass this, the odds, like you wouldn't get through the rest of it.
Right.
Grenades.
The separator.
When you have to throw a grenade into a 2-foot wide bunker, like 25 meters away, to get it in, because, and the thing is like, if you throw it too high, it'll bounce out because they only dig it so far.
Right. That's right.
So, and that's what would happen. Like, no one made it past, like, I don't think anyone but one other guy made it past it. And for me, like, it hit on top of the sandbag right there and then fell in. And then, so that was it, right?
You're in.
Right, sweet,
You're in, man.
Right? So I get through that training, and then we're doing all the testing, and I'm the last guy left. His whole squad didn't make it. And he looked at me and he's like, PFC night. I cannot believe, out of everyone that's here, I cannot believe you're the one, because I was a mortarman. I wasn't a Bravo, right? So, and it's, if you don't know what the difference is, like a mortarman, high angle hell, death and destruction from above. We basically did steel rain. We did indirect fire support for the Bravos that were ahead of us. So when I was there, like, it was a 60 millimeter mortars that we did that support for the Bravos. So he was just like, I'm impressed. He goes, out of everyone, I didn't think you would be the guy still standing here. The thing is that people didn't realize is that I'm very hands-on. I built a car from the ground up when I was, basically rebuilt a car, a Camaro, for my dad when I was 16. So it's like, I'm really good with my hands. So anything where I'm manipulating stuff, which was 90% of the tasks that we're doing out there.
You're in.
Yeah.
You're in.
Like, as soon as my body knows it, like I was into martial arts too for a period of time when I was younger. Like, it's like, as soon as I learned it, it stuck. So I got through this train up and ended up getting awarded my EIB. So those are like, the first year in, I hit 2 major milestones right away.
Right.
And then, of course, all the ruck marching we did. And that's when then Lieutenant Gant shows up. And, of course, I'll say something that was awesome about, like, that command. So when the new command came in for that, after that first year, this new commander came in, and it was, if we trained hard, and we passed at the time it was the RTEP.
Yeah.
And they would go ahead and we would be out by 2:30, 3 o'clock. First sergeant, commander would walk out of his office in board shorts with a surfboard, and he'd yell it out loud, right? And I'm in Delta Quad in Hawaii. And I'm out of here, first sergeant. And he knows, like, we're all done with our training for the day.
Right.
And, it's like, when you train hard, You know, typically, like, you have a good command that says, okay, these guys are all over it, man. I'm going to bust out of here and let them out of here. It didn't happen every day, but it happened quite a bit.
Right.
Train hard, play hard.
That's right.
it.
First sergeant 30 minutes later would be right behind him.
Yeah.
And yell it out, two sergeants.
And he just kind of worked his way down.
So he kind of knew what was going on, right?
Right.
So typically, like, that year that commander was in place, like, pretty much we were out by 3 o'clock every day. And when, of course, the new command comes in,
Different game.
we were getting out until 5:30, 6 o'clock.
Different game.
Yeah, it was a whole different ball game. So it's like this thing, this revolving door of change with leaders, right? But I would say, like, my time there with that organization was like, that's what set me up. Like, with everything else. We had another guy come in. I was in E5 who was in charge of this section, which was Sergeant DeCrisio. And about a year later, this staff sergeant shows up, Michael Douglas. No, not the actor.
Not the actor. I was thinking it.
So he came in. He came from mechanized. And there's one thing that, like, all the infantry guys know. If you start mechanized, you usually love and don't ever want to go.
You stay
light.
mechanized.
Right.
Right.
If you go light and you show up at mech, you hate it. Even though you did all that ruck marching, everything was on foot. It's like, because what I found out when I left Hawaii, I went to Fort Riley. And I went to an armor unit. So we did indirect fire support for an armor unit. It was 120mm mortars. And whenever you go to the field, which is training, like, for the month, when you come back, you spend a week trying to reset.
Right.
Oh, and I absolutely despised it. I was like, I loved it when I was light infantry.
Right.
You'd walk in, you'd clean your weapon systems, radios, turn them in.
Done.
Go throw your stuff in a trunk. You're out of there within a few hours, right?
Yep.
But no, not mech. You're sitting there for a week cleaning,
cleaning.
Oh my gosh, I absolutely just despise being mechanized. But it was funny though, because you show up there, none of the other guys have been light infantry.
Right.
So PT, like, I ran circles around these guys. Like,
right.
It was just like they did PT 3 times a week, not every day. Because maintenance is like, so that's the difference, right? Like, maintenance is more key for their readiness, to where when you're light infantry,
right, you got to focus on the person.
You got to focus on your physical.
You are the weapon.
Yeah, exactly. So there's, like, those gives and takes that you got to deal with. But I absolutely did not like Fort Riley. I had some great people. That was my first deployment. Was in 03. I got there. So basically, from 97 to late 2001. I was in Hawaii, and then I went from basically Fort Riley, 13 tank, from that 2001 until 2003, September of 03. But I deployed. That was my first deployment. But before that deployment, we had gone to, like, NTC twice. I did one NTC rotation when I was in Hawaii. We were out for. And when I went to Fort Riley, I went to NTC, which is the National Training Center out of California. I went there twice with 13 tank, and there was probably a 6 or 8, I feel like maybe it was an 8-month period of time, went through 2 leaders, and not just platoon sergeants, 2 platoon leaders within that time frame.
Wow.
Like, complete dirtbags. The way they treated you, it was basically, it was like toxic. It was hostile. If you weren't part of their clique,
right?
Oh yeah, you completely. Which, you know, a lot of the stuff I see today too in some organizations, the way they treated you it was like, yeah, this is definitely what I don't want to be. So, and there's that saying where they say you learn more from a destructive or bad leader than you do a good leader. And
it's true.
To me, I try. It's like, for me, I think there's more of a balance in that. Because I saw what right looked like,
right,
and then I saw what bad looked like.
Mm-hmm.
It helped me go, I want to be more like that leader, not this leader.
Right.
So it's like, it was a good contrast within, like, it was like my first tour, and then I re-upped and went to Fort Riley, and I almost got divorced during that re-up because my wife didn't want me at the time. Like, by that time I had 1 kid. Ended up dealing with all of that stuff, and it just, you didn't want to be there.
Right.
You know, you're just like, you don't want to give it your all. You're like, this is nothing but a crap hole. You know, you're looking for ways to get out of there. And so they finally treaded out those poor leaders, right? And we got one more. So we got a new platoon sergeant and a new platoon leader. The platoon sergeant, he was better, but he still was not one that I would want to emulate in any way, shape, or form. And he was the one that he was actually getting ready to retire, and he deployed to Iraq with us. And like, in some respects, he was great, but in other respects, there's areas where I thought he could definitely improve on. He would keep us 6, 7 o'clock at night for no reason.
I had one of those.
For no reason, and I'm like, this is pointless.
Yeah.
Like, half of us had families.
Right.
And you're just like, man, I got other things to do than to sit here. I'm like, if we got something to do, I'm like, I'm one of those types.
Right, absolutely. Let's do it.
Hey, Sergeant, this is what we're gonna do.
Right.
Like, if we got something to do, by all means, I'm here and I'm gonna do it.
Right.
But if we're just gonna sit here, because you don't want to go home,
hurry up and wait, man.
right? Like, it absolutely drove me crazy. But I wasn't the only one. So he was supposed to drop his retirement paperwork. And then we have an NTC. This is our second NTC rotation, and it's like January of 03. So probably your side, the oxymoron side of things, you guys probably knew you knew we were getting ready to deploy. There was this build up starting to happen. You guys probably already knew it, right? For myself, we didn't know, right? Well, come to find out, General Franks,
Tommy Franks,
right? He actually went through our armor division and was in one of our companies when he was a lieutenant, and he wanted us to help spearhead this thing. But we were at NTC in the middle of training when the commander got the phone call, and so at the end of NTC, they told us, "Hey, this is what we're doing." Right? It might have been, it might have been right before we left for NTC. He got the phone call, and I think he decided to still have us go train up, so we were fresh for combat. We get back from the rotation, and we start building up to go. Well, our flights never showed up. So, and I can't remember what they call them in the military, but so all over the world, right? We have like these war supplies, war sets that may be on a ship somewhere. And so whenever we go to combat or have a conflict, we don't take our own vehicles. We fly into an area, a staging area, and they show up at a port, and we draw them from the port, and we prep, right? So that's exactly what happened, right? We finally got flights, but we were already too late. We weren't there on time to catch it. So they already initiated the movement to Iraq. And I think we ended up throwing our vehicles and our track systems on Hetz. And they brought us up to when we were about 100 miles outside of Baghdad. And then from there, we met up with the main effort and then moved in. Right. And then we took over what was currently called FOB Justice, or at the time, they didn't have a name for it, but FOB Justice, in 2008, when I ran detainee operations for Task Force 134, or I should say 2007 to 2008, we called it the hanga effort, because FOB Justice is where they would actually hang. That's where they hung Saddam Hussein. But that's the compound we took over. It's called the Ministry of Intelligence compound. And of course, back, I think during the Gulf Wars, where one of our downed pilots actually was held there, and his name was written on the prison wall. That was
wow!
They had like a 6-story building on the compound, and so when we finally got settled, we were doing critical site security of 2 different fuel stations in the area. We were doing gate guard for the main gate. We were doing river patrols with an engineer unit out of Michigan. So this is just us mortars.
Right.
And we were attached to the tankers. And you'd have like we'd get attached to 101st, we'd get attached to the broken TV, we'd get like all these different cores. Like they kept changing. Like there's 5 different patches I could wear, which doesn't make any sense, right? Just over a 6-month period.
Gee.
Because there were so many changes going on
It's like a little deck of cards. Okay, which patch today?
Right. Yeah, right.
Exactly.
But you know, so it's like one of those things that you're like, man, this is insane that we're doing all these different things. So we do 12-hour shifts, and I had 15 guys. I was in charge of the quick reaction force on top of doing our gate guard. So we rotate who's doing what, but we did all these things.
Wow.
And then, so I helped come up with improvements on the main gate, which.
So is this your first deployment or your second deployment?
This is my first deployment.
What rank were you?
I was an E5.
All right.
And I was in charge of the QRF for the tankers.
Yeah.
So you think about it like death before dismount, like that's absolutely like a true statement. They would go out and do patrols on the tanks, which is awesome.
Yeah.
They get shot at, no one's getting hurt. So we all had soft skin.
Right.
So we had 1064 A2s, A3s. It was 1064 A3s at the time, which is a turbocharged diesel engine in our tracked vehicles. So we had to remove our mortar systems out. And it was basically a personnel carrier because we couldn't shoot 120 millimeter mortars in the city.
Right.
So that's why we were the QRF for our own battalion.
Right.
They sent us back to Kuwait. Did a quick 2-week train up on CQB, close quarter battle. That's so you could relearn how to actually enter rooms. So because it had been a long time since his mortars had done it.
Right.
So they ran us through that again. We came back, and then we started doing the quick reaction force piece. And whenever they would run into an issue or skirmish, we were the guys that ran out the gate.
QRF?
Right.
There you go.
Show up and we go clear a building.
Yeah.
And it would be, they ran into that building. You'd be like, that's like 3 or 4 stories, like over 100 rooms in it, and there's like 15 of us.
Right.
I'm like, dude, we're going to be sitting here. You guys are going to be sitting here doing Overwatch for the next couple of hours.
Right.
I'm like, this is going to take us a little bit of time, right? And we shouldn't have been doing it like that, but that's all we had at the time. But 9 times out of 10, like early on in the war, we didn't have a lot of issues early on. It wasn't until later, once we started getting into the raids. So now with all those other pieces we're doing,
Right.
all of a sudden we have Bob who shows up in plain clothes, and they're like, "Hey, yeah, we're gonna go do this mission. We need some tracked vehicles. Do you guys have anyone that's squared away that could freaking like they need to be able to knock down the gate that we're gonna go into."
Right.
So this is the first one we're doing, and I'm the one that's in charge of going with him. So I had to get in plain clothes, driving some hoopty in the middle of Baghdad somewhere. I can't even remember where the heck it was at. We were out of Katamedia province is where we were out of.
Yeah.
And we drive by. He goes, "Yeah, see that gate right there? There's 2 guys with AK-47s outside the gate. The gate's closed. It's iron, like metal." And he's like, "Yeah, that's where I want your track. You're just going to drive right through that sucker." I'm like, "All right, cool, got it. This is what we're doing, right?" So I go back, brief the guys, we stage, and then we take off. We come to do it, and then my driver, like something happened to where he missed it. So I was like, my guys and I had to jump out and dismount. But before those guys they didn't even lift their AKs. It was because we had a 50 cal pointed right at the guys.
Yeah,
they were just like,
"Come on in, come on."
Come on in, bro. So we go into this building, right, and we clear the building, and we had the family outside all lined up, outside on the porch. And we're going through this, and I'm talking to Bob. Like, so yeah, I always use it because it's CIA guy.
Tracking.
Yeah, we got
so
you.
I'm like talking to him, and I'm like, he's like, man, our intel is good. He goes, I don't understand where this is at. So man, we tore that place apart. And so where the dining room is at, there's like this like hallway before you get to the kitchen. And I just remember looking, and of course my architectural mind, I was in the construction. I look up and I'm like, why does that ceiling in the hallway that's about 10 feet long
Why is it small?
drop
Lower.
from 12 feet down to 8 foot, and then it goes back up to 12? So I'm like, okay, there's something funny here. So I go over to Bob and I'm like, bro, check this out. I'm like, that looks funny to me. So I walk through to the other side and go back into the kitchen, and I look up and there's a vent. And I'm like, pull that vent down. He started grinning. He's like, "Oh yeah, this is
it."
We pull it back, find a couple $100,000 in American money, a bunch of AK-47s, RPGs.
Wow.
And that was the first raid we were on. And that pretty much hooked.
Right.
So whenever we had like something in an area and he didn't have like other infantry assets, he would come to us and work with us, and we just started doing raids. I probably did about 4 of them, and then stop loss wasn't in effect. And of course, Mama.
Yeah.
I had my second child. I watched her be born. 2 days later, I flew out for Iraq. So my second daughter was born, flew out. Now it's like, okay, I have a daughter, another daughter,
Yeah.
and I'm like, you know what? I seen her for 2 days and
Right.
it's gone.
Right.
So I'm like, you know what? No, I'm out of here. And she was born on the day the ground war started. Yeah. So I was like, you know what? I'm like, as much as I want to stay in, she was like, we're going to get divorced if you stay.
Yeah.
And I'm like, all right, you know what? I'm going to go home. I'm going to try to go active duty National Guard.
Right.
And that's how I'm going to try to, because I'm like, I cannot go back and do something else. So I started looking into active duty guard and trying to figure that out. Well, so I ended up leaving. I'm at Fort Riley clearing. So my wife was there. She left and cleared housing. I just had to show up and sign out as the service member saying, hey, you're cleared housing. So I'm probably on ground about a week. And then I go to housing and I clear housing. And the very next morning we get called the rear D commander. The rear deck commander was a master sergeant. He's like, all right, I want everyone that's cleared housing over here. So we have people that are coming and going, right? And those that are in stop, like, there's no stop loss in effect. So these guys are like coming home and going, like, and getting out of there. And then of course you have the new guys coming. And he's like, all right, all of you that cleared housing, you go through, like, he held everyone in formation, right? Walks through, check. And as he's checking your paperwork, he's like, get out of here. You're good. Keep clearing. So I'm walking away, right? And he walks over into the formation in front of the other guys. He's like, all of you, you're going back to Iraq. Stop loss is in effect. Bro. And I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, how did this happen? Right? I'm like, this is insane. So they finally implemented stop loss, and that was the determining factor. If they've already shipped household goods,
you're out.
Yep, you're going because we're not sending them back. So the cost would have been too high. So that's how they did that.
Wow.
But I remember being in the barracks, right, and like going to clear because my wife at the time was back home in Lansing, Michigan, and I was sitting in the barracks to finish clearing, and there was this Bluebird bus, right, driving along the back. So if you've ever been to Fort Riley, they call it the Hill, and there's like this big, huge loop, and it goes one way, right?
Yeah.
And we see this Bluebird bus, myself and Corporal Thompson, driving by, and there's 2 brand new newbies right from basic training, AIT, walking up, getting ready to walk up the barracks steps, and all of a sudden you hear boom, 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 right? And of course, we just came back from Iraq.
Right.
Him and I hit the ground. We hit the ground in front of a vehicle, start calling out, distance and direction.
Right.
And those guys stop and look at us and they start laughing. And we were like, oh my gosh, this is where we're at. We stopped. And we looked at them and we were like, you just wait. You guys still got to go to combat. And we just walked away. And the look on their face when they saw how we just naturally reacted, they were just like, oh my gosh, what are we getting into? But my tour, that tour was for me, like, as much of a pain in the butt it was, I enjoyed it. Now I'm going to give you one tidbit. I know we're going a little long. There was a period of time. So in that 6-story building, like, I had one of my soldiers. He still brings it up to this day every time he sees me. I used to so whenever we had downtime, like we had time to do PT because we still did PT.
Right.
I would run them up and down the steps, and we would do all of our PT work in that building because no one was allowed to stay in it.
Right.
Because they would just shoot RPGs. They would use that as an aiming point.
Nice target.
SAM-7 RPGs.
Beautiful target.
Right.
They just keep shooting them at it. So they would land all over the fob, or the mortars. They would use that as a guide point to go ahead and shoot mortars into us. But he was like, Chris, he's like, man, I'm sorry, they still call me Sergeant to this day.
Yeah.
Like, they didn't know me as Sergeant Major Knight. They didn't know me as anything First Sergeant, anything like that. But it's like, even their spouses, their wives call me Sergeant Knight when I still see it to this day.
Right.
But it's, and we would do PT on that, and I loved how much time, like, there was things that I find out later from my troops because I kept in contact with them. They're like, that was like the greatest thing ever. Like you would come up with some crazy stuff for us to do, and you kept us in shape. You kept us like mentally focused.
Right.
Well, the sad thing is that when I left, there's also an Olympic training compound right there next to the Ministry of Intelligence compound. They ended up getting their hands. Some of them got their hands on steroids. And then that took a hold of. I wasn't here. I was gone. But they were like, man, if you were there, that probably wouldn't have happened. Because we even had females approach the gate that were probably underage, trying to do some stuff. And I just remember looking at my guys going, And it's like before the girl could even finish, like, because you have the interpreter there and you're like hearing them talk. So you're there for 6 months on ground, hearing them talk.
Right.
You start to pick up on like
phrases.
You don't know exactly what they're saying, but the phrases you're kind of like, oh my gosh. So as soon as the girl said a certain phrase at that time, I don't remember what it was now. I just remember looking at the interpreter saying, "Get her the heck out of here."
Right.
I'm like, no, my guys, I don't want this anywhere near us. But it happened consistently.
Wow.
Where you would have stuff like that at the gate, and you would have to sit there. You had to be that ethical pillar for your team to go, no, we're not doing this.
Right.
And of course, it's at first they're like, man, this sucks. And it's like, guys, look at this. I'm like, I understand. Look, we're in war and you're not thinking straight.
Right.
You know, and they're just like, no, we get it. We get a SAR-9. We know what you're doing. I'm like, we have to represent who we are as a nation, and this is not who. Like, we cannot go down this path.
I told my guys, you know, you do human things in inhumane situations, right? So it's not for me to judge, but I don't want to know about it. I don't want to know about it. Like, if you get caught, you're on your own, bro. If you get caught, and there was a lot of different things going on over there, right? But I don't want to know about it. If I'm aware, your ass is grass, right? I can't help you, right? So you have to bite that bullet. And I know we spent a lot of time on your first deployment. So moving on, we got a lot of stuff to cover still. You know, when you got to Michigan and some other things. But man, what'd you learn? What'd you really learn from that first deployment? Good leadership, bad leadership? What really made the most profound impact on you during that time frame?
I would say that it had to do more with how I led the men. And I think is like what it still rings true today. Like one of the books I actually referred to you, it makes me think back to that time, and it's called The Mission, The Men, and Me. And that book, like basically it's saying to me about that time frame. And to me, it's like you find a way as a leader to, the mission always comes first, but you always try to balance taking care of your men the best that you can, because you know sometimes you can't.
Right.
You can't control what you're going to do in the mission.
Right.
But you do the best that you can to actually give your men what they need in order to overcome it. And I say men because at that time, infantry, we were nothing but men. I would say that staying focused on the mission and not being focused on all the drama and all the other stuff, because we had other issues. We had stuff, we had people embezzling money. We had people sending money home.
Right.
I mean, you heard about I already said something about when I left, like there were some guys that started doing steroids. So all those things, like just trying to be that ethical pillar and showing them like what to be and what not to be. And some of the training up that we did before it, like my men would look at me. So I was base gun. I was in charge of base gun as an E5. And the men would always go, man, how come the other tracks aren't working like we are? How come we're always training? I'm like, well, that's why we're base gun. I'm like, and then if we go to combat, I don't want you to have to think. I want your body just to do.
Right.
Right.
I want you to have to think about what you're doing. I want your body just to do it so your mind can think through everything else that's coming at you. And once we got into combat, that rang true.
Absolutely.
They were like, man, you trained us hard, but now we know why. Like, it sucked because there was a period of time in our history that I don't think leaders were able to actually let their soldiers see that or actually live through that. The piece of where I'm going to train the heck out of you and then there was nothing on the back end to show like this is why.
Right.
But that helped them profoundly moving forward.
Right.
I would also say, like, one tidbit, like, they looked at me and they were like, how are you not scared every time we go outside the wire?
Bro, I am. I'm just not showing it.
Yeah.
Right. And that's just it. Like, the group of them just stopped me. We're at battalion, like, getting ready to do another QRF run. And they're like, Sergeant Knight, how are you? You're like, calm. Like, it's just like another day in the park. And I'm like, well, I know where I'm going. They're like, what do you mean? I was like, I know when I die, I know where I'm going. I'm secure in my faith, and I'm secure with what's going to happen.
Right.
And I'm here to do a job. And if I let my mind drift onto my family or anything else, I could get you killed. I'm like, I need to stay focused on what we're doing and how we're doing it.
Right.
And some of them, like, they had lost faith in God. And the ones that, when I said that, it was like there was two of them that just kind of went, whoa. Wow, I guess I can see what you're saying, because they had that faith. They lost it, but then they found their faith again through that deployment and observing, like, how not just I, but other leaders that were able to do that reacted.
Right.
But for the most part, like, team, I know, like, we all joined for service, or most of us joined for service. But when you're in combat, like, it's about the guy in the foxhole next to you. Everything else doesn't matter. I didn't talk to my family very much when I was in Iraq the first time, because I didn't want to lose sight, which was bad for them.
Right.
You know, because it looked like I didn't care, and that's exactly what my ex-wife thought, that I did not care, and it was like, I needed to stay in the middle.
But
like,
it kept you alive.
Right?
It keeps you alive.
Right.
When you're in the moment.
Yeah, and that was it. Like, I just couldn't do it.
So how long did y'all stay married after that? So you came out of Fort Riley, you came back from deployment, you got, the luck of the draw, right? Stop loss. So stop loss happens. You basically can't get out the military. Like, they stop you from your ETS date, your expiration, term of service.
Yep.
And you do not have a choice. Like, you're there, whether you like it or not.
Yeah, you're there until they're done. Like, until they're done with war. That's it.
So, or unless they lift it,
Yep.
right?
Yep.
So you get lucky, and then you go back to Lansing.
Yeah, go back to Lansing, Michigan.
Let's take a break. I gotta go to the bathroom.
False.
Yeah, that's not a bad idea. I told you guys it'd be a while. It's all good.
Oh, man, I'll tell you what. We've had some amazing conversations so far. You have had a life, Christopher. You have really had a life. And we haven't got you past 25 yet, have we? 30. We're about in there.
Yeah.
And so I think it's, and we could probably go on for hours, literally hours, because you've shared so much with us already, but we know a lot about you already. What I think would be awesome, go ahead and try to bring us up till, through your sergeant major training, because I'd really like us to just have a little bit more in-depth conversation on what your leadership skills came from, where your integrity comes from. And you've mentioned faith 2 or 3 times. I think faith in the battlefield has a lot of power. And I would really kind of like to hear your take on that.
All right. Yeah, no, let's do it. So I'll try to be as quickly and descriptive as I can be. So December 2003, I'm on ground. So I'm still in transitional leave from PTS and from the military. I go and apply for a recruiting position with the Michigan National Guard.
Okay.
I get picked up for that AGR, the active guard position. So when I say AGR, that's what I mean, active guard reserve, which is, they say it's the best kept secret in the military. I think I worked harder those last
in the guard?
15 years of my career than I did the first 6 years of my career. Okay? Because you hold many hats on active guard. So the recruiting piece of it, obviously, I already talked about it, did some sales. And now I'm back into go to recruiting school, started recruiting, did that for about a year. And then I end up putting in for a position, an active guard position with the 177th Military Police Brigade out of Taylor, Michigan. As their readiness NCO. So their readiness NCO, that's their full-time job. Where I'm basically the commander. I'm acting as the commander for that organization, and I should say the HHC of that organization for a period of time in between drills and our 2-week annual trainings that we have, which that kind of disappeared later. But so I did that, moved over to the military police, which is kind of weird. You go from infantry to military police, so and of course that's where I think they really found out. If I go back quickly to my mortar days, yeah, I might have been like in charge of a gun squad, but a lot of times I was running the fire direction control center, which when you go back, like if you know anything about that, you're the backup operations center, tactical operations center for the battalion if they get taken out. So you have to battle track everything that's happening on the battlefield. So I got my taste of operations and did a lot of operational stuff those first 6 years, or I should say 5 years of the 6 on the active side. So my M-Day job, which is your part-time job in the Guard, like your drill weekend job.
Right.
I was a plans NCO for the operations for the S3 for operations. So that's where I got a lot of my experience in reference to. So being the readiness NCO, you learn admin, you learn supply. You're managing the admin person, the supply person, the maintenance person, and then training.
You get good at a lot of different things.
Yes, very quickly.
Right.
So it's like I picked up a lot of different skills that I didn't really realize like is really transferable, but it's us military guys that need to learn how to transfer that to the civilian side. Like, and that's where like once you figure that out, like the opportunities are huge.
Yes.
So I did that for a period of time, and we deployed so basically with that organization, we deployed in 07 to 08. And at the time, I just got promoted to E7. The guy that was my battalion commander on active duty for the deployment, Colonel Sherman, was the OC that was overseeing our train up for our deployment to Iraq.
Awesome.
For the brigade. So he was running the operations for the OC, like observing, controlling it. And I approached him and he was like, "Oh my gosh, Chris, hey, how you doing?" So he started talking to me, right? And he's like, "Man, it's great to see you're doing well." He goes, "Ricky Pring," which is Sergeant Major Pring, Command Sergeant Major Pring, which was his CSM, was like, he knew when you left that you would find your way somewhere else. He goes, he had no doubt in your mind that you would succeed no matter what you did. So there I was, and I think he purposely ran us down we're going to kill everybody off. So I'm a newly promoted E7.
Okay.
And he kills everybody senior to me out of the talk, and I'm still running the operations. And we basically ran past, and he's like, "I can't give you no more index."
Right.
And I was just like, and I thought I did horrible. I'm like, "Oh my gosh, this was a nightmare," right? And they approached me afterwards, and they're like, "You have a very natural talent to run operations." I'm like, "What are you talking about? That was chaos."
Yeah.
You know? And he was like, "You ran out the scenario and you kept going." He goes, "Usually people fail at this point. Like you were able to, like we
You
ran
fought
out of
through,
what to
you
do."
fought through it.
Right.
Yeah, you fought through it.
So at that point, like that told me a lot about myself, but that also opened the eyes of like my CSM at the time, and of course the general, General Mike Nevin, which he was an awesome general to work for. But we deployed to Iraq, and our command sergeant major at the time got pulled to MNFI, Multinational Forces Iraq, to be a liaison for them. And we had an E8 there that stayed with us. But basically, he walked up to me and he was like, "Hey, you know what the hell you're doing. Just tell me what we need to do." And to me, but that goes to humility, right? And vulnerability.
I think that's great.
The guy was very humble and he was very vulnerable to share with me. He was like, "You did an outstanding job. You can do this way better than me. so he used my strengths. And he goes, you tell me what needs to be done and I'm going to bark. Wow. I'll be the one to continue barking. So I was the current operations NCO that ran the talk, but in a sense, like, and then another E4 that worked for me, E3 that just got promoted to E4. Him and I could do everything in the talk with nobody else in the talk. Wow. For over 15,000 service members, 5 TIFs, 27,000 detainees.
What's a TIF?
Theater internment facility for those that we collected, or I shouldn't say we, but as a force, we ended up picking up for whatever reason. But you're managing that, high-value detainees, the hang after mission, which we weren't allowed to call it that, but we still call it that. Like, don't let anyone fool you. But the whole thing was that we only supplied moving that high-value detainee to the location. It was all on the criminal courts of the Central Criminal Courts of Iraq and the Iraqi High Tribunal to decide what they were doing with these, and we would just transport and say, "Here you go." Right. Because it wasn't us making these decisions; they made all those decisions. And we worked. Currently, General Mike Stone worked with the Iraqi government to help them build some of their laws in place because he was a lawyer by trade. So that was probably like a great thing about the National Guard that you don't see on the active side. Right. Is that, I have this job too on the outside. So all these different skills play into different ways that we were able to do a lot more things that most Guard units wouldn't be able to do. Or active units wouldn't be able to do because we had such a diverse group of individuals. But that's how I got, like, I think that's where people started to realize this guy's got some talent. To me, I looked at it, I was just like, I'm happy to be here, and I don't want to be in a talk. I don't want to be in a talk no more. I told General Nevin, I was like, I'd rather go out and get shot at every day. Like my first deployment, than be in a talk and deal with this stuff. I'm like, but I can do it. And he goes, Chris, I don't understand why. I'm like, because it's just, to me, like, there's some petty stuff that happens in the talk. Right.
Absolutely.
It's like, because there's to me, like, you have some senior individuals that they're not out there every day seeing the fog of war. That they don't realize, like, what your problem in here is so petty compared to what's happening out there. Exactly. So we do the deployment. I come home, and then I'm right back to my job again, doing readiness, and I end up. I think about 2011, I see the Inspector General position come open, the Assistant Inspector General for the state of Michigan come open, or I should say for the Michigan Guard, which you oversee Air and Army Guard at that point. And we'll kind of go back to my last name, Knight. It's my adopted last name, right? And when I look at Knight, like, I think honor, integrity, like, you're supposed to be a pillar of something better than yourself. And even though that was my adopted name, I still felt like I wanted to live up to the name.
You embraced it.
Yes, absolutely.
Yes.
And I've been told countless times, Knight, man, that's an awesome name for a soldier.
It is.
I don't disagree with you. It's an awesome name.
It is cool.
Soldier. So for me, like, I've always tried to live and be that ethical pillar, the best that I could be. And when I saw this position open up, so when I was in Hawaii, I actually did a correspondent course for private investigation. So when I read up on what the IG does,
pretty much the same.
It's a piece of it, They do assistance, they do investigations, they do teach and train, and they do inspections. So those are their core functions for the military. And so when I saw that, I was like, man, this is right up my alley, right? Yeah. So I put in for the IG job, and I think I went up against 28 different applicants, and I was selected to be the one for it. For whatever reason, I don't know, but I'm the one that got the position. And I did that for 3 years, did a couple whistleblower reprisal cases, did a couple other investigations. I handled over 535 assistance cases, input, like, basically set up all of our intel oversight inspections for Army and Air Guard. So there's a lot of different things I learned from that position, but I really enjoyed it, and that was where my leader influence. So this is where we kind of talk about the leadership.
Yes, absolutely.
Like a leader versus a boss or a manager kind of comes into play.
Right.
And it's obviously there's a clear difference, and I think a lot of people talk about that, to where a leader is one that can influence others. You don't have to be in a position of responsibility to influence others. So leadership is the ability to influence others to accomplish something greater or to accomplish a mission or a task. To where a boss, it's more or less, I can just tell you what to do and you respect me by position.
Right.
You're just going to do what I say because you have to do it.
Right.
Yeah. Rank and title really doesn't make you a leader. It positions you to have the activity and the actions of a leader, but that doesn't mean you're a leader.
You ever seen Band of Brothers?
Yeah.
That at the end, man, the main character, that major, he ended up getting promoted to major. He was like a young lieutenant when it started, and then he ran into Captain Sobel, and he tried to put his head down and not say or do anything, and he's like, "Hey, it's like Captain," and went over there and saluted him. He was like, "Look, man, you salute the rank, you don't salute the man."
Right.
And I thought that was very appropriate.
Yeah. Absolutely. Absolutely.
So that's
it, huh?
Yeah, that was like I really enjoyed that because the influence that I had to help command. So a lot of times people look at the inspector general as like the black hats. Like, you're coming in to ruin my command. You're coming in with all these problems and issues that soldiers are going to complain about, and you're just going to come in and wreak havoc on us. And it's like, I kind of flip that around. And I would reach out to commands and go, we're not just here for them. We're here for you. What does that mean? Let's say you want to take an action on someone, but you're like, I don't know exactly what I can do, right? Like, you have the JAG. But if you ask me just from a policy standpoint, I can argue this,
right,
which is what lawyers do.
Right.
It's not what's in policy, it's what I can argue. For me, it was like, I can go to a command and go, this is your left limit and this is your right limit. Anything within these limits and this policy, this regulation, this law, you can do as a command. And so once they started to learn, like, hey, we can ask, Master Sergeant Knight, is this within that purview? And 9 times out of 10, I would go, here's the regulation, review it just to make sure, and then you call me back and you tell me if you think you can.
Right.
And then I'll tell you if it's within
parameters.
Yeah, exactly. So I started I was trying to empower them to do their own research and not try to just use me as the easy button.
Yeah. Well, I think you hit on another key part of leadership, empowerment. Yeah, and absolutely. Too often, too many people aren't empowered to be successful. And I think a good leader empowers those people to be successful that they work with. And so I think empowerment is something lots of people that are in charge, bosses, are scared to do because they're too busy worrying about their own job. But empowerment is that thing that real leaders do naturally because they've already figured out that if I empower you to be you and to be all that you are,
right,
you are going to be better than I ever thought you could be. So, yeah, that's a good word. That's a good word. We've had the chance. Bear and I have had a lot of time to, we hang out, we work together, and one of the things we have identified for you, and I'm going to speak for Bear. He doesn't even know what I'm about to say, but I'm going to act like I'm a coyote. He's a bear. I'm a little coyote. I'm scared of bears. But the idea of leadership that you present in the workplace is about integrity and honor and many of the things that you've talked about. You do try to empower people. You really do. Even when you're not trying to, it's just part of who you are, and you've learned that. And I think the military gave you a lot of that backbone and how to do that. But at the end of the day, I think it's because of your spiritual countenance, your spiritual foundation. Am I wrong?
No, you're spot on.
Okay.
I mean, that's 100% there. I've always felt like so my parents didn't really take me to church growing up. And I'll kind of this is going to kind of go into my childhood a little bit, back into on the spiritual side of my childhood. I know there was a period of time where I one or two times I got on a bus and went to, it's probably like 5 or 6 years old, and went to, and I think it was my parents, because my father grew up Catholic. My stepfather, who I call my dad,
right?
He ended up, I think he wanted to give me the opportunity to decide for myself, which kind of plays into the whole, free will. He wanted to show me something different. So I did. I ended up going twice, and of course, at that time, what problem did I have? I had a problem with reading comprehension. So of course, growing up through school, I didn't like it when a teacher would be like, "Hey, we want you to read this out loud."
Oh, I bet.
I hated it.
No self-confidence.
Right. Yeah, exactly. There was none. You get me on my bike, you get me doing something physical.
Let's go.
I'll run circles around.
Right.
Like I can do it all day long. But when it came to, you want me to do what? So that kind of made me timid and scared to not want to be, to go to church, because that's what they would do. And of course, they didn't have IEP in church.
No, they didn't.
So when you put me with kids my same age, and I'm 4 or 5 years behind them, or I'm behind them at this time, I wasn't that far behind, but I'm behind them enough to where I'm going to get made fun of. So I say, oh, no, I don't want to go no more. But within my heart, I knew, I don't know, I've always believed that there was something higher, something bigger than me, bigger and better, and something that kind of drove, as I got older, drove more of an ethical piece into me, that I eventually went on my own. So when I was working as a bell valleyman at the Radisson Hotel in downtown Lansing in '96, I'm not like most Christians where I know the exact day that I got baptized. Because to me, those kinds of things to me are insignificant. I think it's because I've always believed in God. I just didn't know, I didn't have a relationship with God.
Right. Gotcha.
So for me, there was a guy named Eric Anderson that worked there with me. He was a security guard. And being I worked the night shift, him and I actually started going through the Bible, because he was a regular attending Christian church. And so it started to really grab me. And so now I'm older though, and I'm able to read and comprehend, and I'm obviously like 19, 20 years old at this time. So then I started actually learning more about it, and then I eventually got saved at the church I was attending with my ex-wife. At the time, she was my fiance. So that kind of led me down that path, and it kind of it's always spoke to me in reference to what we're supposed to try to be and how we're supposed to treat others.
Yeah.
I think I believe I've always been that way with my soldiers. Sometimes I feel like I've done better with my soldiers than I have my own family. Because, and I think a part of it's because a lot of these guys that join the military, they joined for a different reason than I did. I had family. I had a home that didn't break apart. Right. I had a solid footing foundation in my home life. I didn't have a bunch of trauma when I was growing up. I joined to serve. A lot of these guys, they joined to serve, but they were also joining for camaraderie. They were looking for a family. They were looking for somewhere to belong and to be a part of something bigger than themselves.
Right.
So when I actually, for me, going through that whole process, I wanted to try to be a better leader and to help influence them to actually feel more connected to what we do as individuals. But I didn't want, I wasn't trying to be a leader to be liked, because you don't want to be a leader that's just liked. But I think you want to be I'd rather be a leader that's loved for the right reasons than liked for the wrong reasons. And I see that a lot today in corporate America. I've even seen it today or I should say before I retired from the military back in 2018,
Right.
it's like, I like this guy because he lets me do this, or I like this girl because they let me do this and that, and it's like in violation of policies, regulations, but it's like, they're cool. Me, it's like, well, this is why we don't do it. This is why we should do this instead.
Right.
And there's like this standard we should uphold because it's good for the good order and discipline, or for the better of the good order and discipline of the organization.
Right.
But I also wanted to show that, like, you can unconditionally love somebody else.
Mm-hmm.
You don't. It's like I don't have to. It's like I try to tell the current people I work with, like, so I work for a nonprofit in the Houston area, and I trying to get them to understand, like, because I don't have the same lived experience as you do, but you don't know mine.
Right.
You know, you didn't know I haven't even talked about me losing my son.
It's true.
So it's like, you don't even know what I've been through, but you need to understand, like, I can love you regardless, but learn how to love back the same way. Like, and I think, to me, it's like, that's what God demands of us. And I've noticed, like, the more that I treat people with utmost respect, compassion, and not being an enabler,
Right.
it's been more beneficial to my relationships with many people.
Right.
And I get a lot farther, obviously, with the honey and the love than I do with being a jackass.
True.
Because I know for me, like, there's some soldiers that you got to be a jackass to, and they'll respect you. But I was one of those soldiers that, like, you want to be a jackass, like, whatever.
Right.
You lost me. Yeah. Like, if that's the way you want to lead, like, that does not work for me. I think there's a level of respect that needs to always go both ways. There's some guys that do deserve it. Don't get me wrong. I've had to knife hand people plenty of times. But for me, like, it's been more of a guiding principle, and I think that also plays into me being an inspector general, which also goes back to my name. Like, I think those kind of three things really shape who I am and where I've gone, and where I'm still probably aiming to go.
Sure. Well, you're not done.
No.
I mean, you've got a lot. You still have a lot of life ahead of you, and you still have a lot of influence to share and a lot of people to help grow. And I think your life as a leader is just getting started. I really do. You have a lot more to give and a lot more to serve. So, what do you think, Bear?
I kind of wanted to touch base on something. You had mentioned it, and I was not going to bring that up at all. You know, we all have our own individual stories, but you don't know unless you ask, right? You don't know what somebody's been through on the other side of the table. But you know what I'm about to ask next. So if you wouldn't mind sharing about that, or if you do, that's okay too. We ain't got to talk about that.
No, I'm more than happy. Like, if we're going to talk about my son, I love talking about my son.
You had mentioned you lost your son, and I can't even imagine what that's like.
So yeah, no, I'll touch on that, and I'll kind of give a little bit of history. So in 2017, my son was 23 years old. He was into motorcycles like I was, cars like I was. And he went out and bought a motorcycle like I did when I was 19. And instead of buying a truck or a car, he bought a motorcycle. I did the same darn thing. But he had been into bikes well before. Well, I guess I shouldn't say that. I got pictures of him on the back of my motorcycle when he was probably 4 or 5 years old. But he's always liked bikes. So he went out and got a bike, and one day, not even a mile and a half from my parents' house, which he would stop by there daily and see my parents. I was homesick, so I was the sergeant. I was the operations sergeant major for the Regional Training Institute out of Fort Custer, Michigan at the time, and I was homesick. Like, my stomach was not feeling good for a couple days. I was like, man, just what the heck is going on with me? Like, it felt like some weird bug, and I don't know if that was just spiritual, something like moving within me, like preparing me for something bad to happen. But I get a phone call. Well, I shouldn't say it. He texted me earlier that day, and he's like, hey, hey, Dad, like me and my buddy, we're gonna ride out and come see you. We want to check out the Supra, and then talk with you, see how you're doing. I'm like, well, I'm sick, son. I'm like, I don't like. You want to come out, you can, but be warned.
Right.
Like I'm not feeling well, and
Right.
I don't really know what's going on. So he's like, all right, yeah, no problem. We'll see you then. He's like, we're still coming out, and I'm like, okay. Well, that was about I think 11:30 on September 20th of 2017, which is also my oldest daughter's birthday. I get a phone call from my mom, and she tells me that my son had been hit by a truck on his bike. And it wasn't his bike, it was someone else's bike. They basically did a California roll, or they didn't stop at the stop. Like they slowed down, but they did not do a complete stop. They saw the big old white van 3 car lengths behind them, but didn't see the big bright green, I shouldn't say big, but the bright green bike in front of it. And they went to go do it, and they turned left right into him. He died instantly. Broken vertebrae in 3 different places. All internal organs were completely destroyed. Someone did witness to him on the spot. I've had my son actually, I shouldn't say witness to him, but actually prayed over him. So I got the phone call, and immediately I dropped the phone. I looked up, and I'm like, it's probably the hardest thing to ever do. But the faith I had, and mind you, I'm 40 years old.
Yeah.
So what's 40 say? Like, if you're a Bible person, you know their numbers mean something. 40 is the time of preparation.
Mm-hmm.
So I feel like I've been being prepared for something, looking back, but I'll get back into that later. I look up and I go, God, if he cannot walk, or if it's going to be to the point where he feels like he's a burden on everybody else because he was larger than life. I was like, take him. If your kingdom's calling him home, take him. If not, let it be just a broken leg, let him heal up. But they would not tell me on the phone I was an hour away. I lived in Howell, Michigan at the time. He was in Lansing. I was an hour away, and no one would tell me his status. They just said it's bad. Right. They already knew. Like, my dad was already at the hospital. Aunts and uncles on my dad's side of the family was already there. His mother had shown up. His brother and sisters had shown up. Not my daughters, but from his mother. They'd all known. And we're driving there, and my dad calls me about 10 minutes out. He's just like, Chris, where are you at? And I'm like, Dad, I'm still like 15, 20 minutes out. I'm like, we live an hour away. I'm like, what do you expect? He goes, Chris, just get here. It's bad. So in that instant, like, I was kind of like, he's not telling me what's wrong.
Right.
I'm like, this isn't good. So I get to the hospital. I run in the hospital, Sparrow Hospital there in Lansing, and they go to take me to the room where I thought he was at, and they walk me into the bereavement room where the whole family's at.
Right.
I walk right in, and I go, where the hell is my son at?
Yeah.
I didn't come here to see my family. I come to see my son, and my dad was just like, Chris, he's dead. And I would say, like, in that instant, like, if you have a kid, you can't even think what it's like to lose a child.
Yeah.
So I pretty much, that is probably the hardest thing in my life to ever live through. I've been divorced. I have a beautiful, great wife now, also a retired sergeant major, 26 years.
Christina's great.
Yeah, she's been with me since 2007. But there is nothing in the world that could prepare you for a death of a child. And it's like the only group in the world you don't ever want to be a part of. I think probably the next closest thing to would probably be like MST, like sexual trauma. So I go, his mother, like, after that day, his mother calls me the next day, and she's just like, Chris, I can't do this. And I'm like, what's that? She's like, I can't handle the funeral arrangements. So what does Sergeant Major Knight do?
Takes care of it.
I go right into, I take this thing and put it in a box.
Yep.
And I go, we're going to put that problem of me trying to grieve over here.
You go into solution mode.
And I go into, I got to fix a problem.
Yeah.
And my goal was to have my son on the ground in a week. And that's all I focused on, was getting him in the ground. I got that done. And then I grieved. I had an awesome chain of command, awesome OIC at the time. Like they were just like, whatever you need to do.
Yeah.
Like there was, I mean, they didn't even freaking charge me leave. They were just like, call me every day, let me know what's going on. If I need something, I'll tell you we need it. So I was probably out a good 3 weeks. And I showed back up, and they were like, what are you doing here? I'm like, it's been 3 weeks, man.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm like, I got to come back to work. And they're like, are you ready to be here? And I'm like, well, what else are you going to do? I'm like, I can't burn all my leave sitting at home. And they were like, no, that's not what's going on, Chris. Like, just take care of business, right? So I stayed at work, and I would probably get through like half the day and go home. Mm-hmm. But I still routine, get into this, start doing this over and over again. But I would say this about to any parent: the pain never leaves.
Yeah.
You know, I think Jocko put it last like when he talks about if you've ever surfed like the waves, like you have these supersets that are coming in, you go to hit that first wave and you wipe out, right? And when you come back up for air, the next wave's already there hitting you. So when you lose that child, like it's just nonstop. You can't come up for air. You're just constantly being bombarded with grief, anger. I mean, all these different emotions that are going on that you can't focus. You can't do certain things. He said, but you eventually get to that point to where the set finally settles down enough to where you have a big enough break, and you finally come up for a little bit of air. You go back under, but at least you were able to get in a good breath of air, and he goes in that. So it's just like a set of waves coming in and out, and it's still true to today. Like I can wake up and be in an awesome mood, nothing bad's happening. It's been going on 6 years this year. And just out of the blue, someone kicks over that box. What could it be? It could be as simple as something I hear on a TV show. It could be as simple as I'm friends with my son's friends on Facebook. Like, and you sit there and you look back and you go, man, like, you see them courting a girl. You see them get engaged.
Yeah.
You probably know where I'm going.
I do.
You see them have kids. And you look back and you go, man, my son could have had all these things, but he doesn't. And that, I would say, is probably the hardest thing in the world to deal with.
How did you...
But you're happy for him.
Man.
Yeah.
You're completely, like, you're ecstatic for his friends, like, but you're like, man, you missed all that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's selfish. Don't get me wrong, it's selfish as hell.
Yeah, but you're human. Yeah, sometimes you got to be a human being and not a human doing. And I mean, that is tough, bro, just to sit here and hear. And I appreciate you sharing that. I have an idea of how tough that is.
Yeah.
What got you through all that? What got you through the other side? What gave you your reprieve on that next wave? Was it faith? Was it service?
What was 100% faith? Knowing where I'm going. Knowing that one day I will see him again.
Yep.
And Chap, I believe this is your wheelhouse.
It's my wheel.
I mean, regardless of even so, when we go to heaven, it'll be a different relationship. But it's knowing, like, watching him witness to one of his younger sisters about problems and praying to God and understanding that you don't always get what you want. God gives you what you need.
Yep.
Like, knowing that he did that in the car, and my wife reminded me of that told me he had faith. Mm-hmm. So with that, like, I'm able to rest in knowing in my heart and my beliefs that he'll be there when I get there. And now, but it turns into a countdown. I'm 40 years away.
Yeah.
I'm 30 years away. Like, so when you hear those songs on the radio, it talks about, you know, like age and how time goes by.
Right.
Like, those songs ring true to like the way you think as a father when you've lost a kid or even a mother. And then of course my loss, the way I deal with my loss and the way I should say a man and the way a woman deals with the loss is completely different.
Correct.
It's so different. Like they had that maternal connection that you and I will never have because we didn't carry this child with us for a period of time. But you know, as a father, we look at it more like legacy. Who's carrying on the name from me?
Right.
And the only way that's going to happen is if my daughters have someone that's willing to let them name their son Knight.
Right.
Yeah.
You know? So it's like you live through all those things and you think through all those things, and every once in a while it'll just come up and grab you out of nowhere. And there's other days where it doesn't. There's days I can talk about it and I'm perfectly fine. Like I'm surprised I'm not a blubbering idiot right now. You know, because of it's. You want people to understand like the struggle and the trauma, because that's trauma. You know, like if you were a child and you lost a parent, you don't realize that is trauma.
Right.
Like even if you didn't watch it happen, that's trauma in your life. Losing a son, especially that way, you ride bikes. So I rarely ride on the road anymore. I think the year he passed away, I probably put maybe 300, 400 miles on my bike. I used to put almost 7,000 to 8,000 miles on my bike. So now my bike's set up for the track, and I track ride my bike. Because it's safer, believe it or not, to do 100 miles an hour on a track closed loop circuit than it is to drive on the road with traffic. 5 miles an hour traffic.
Yeah.
Especially here in Houston.
Oh, yeah.
No doubt.
Absolutely.
So I appreciate you asking me about my son. He was... it kind of goes back to, like, I kind of mentioned I thought he was here for his mother. I believe that was his whole purpose. To help her through her. She had a period of time where she was still trying to find herself. One of those pillars that helped her out.
Yeah.
And then I think once she found her way, his time was up.
Could be.
Yeah.
Could be. Well, man, thanks for going down a very hard trail.
Yeah,
I know
it's a rough
we
one.
saved it to we waited to the very end to get into that, and I'm glad we waited till the end. I don't think I could have continued. I've had loss in my life. I understand. Man, it's been a downer and an upper all at the same time. This is the last couple of hours, but I am so grateful that you're open enough to share your life. I wish more people would do that, because you're, like you said earlier, nobody knows. They haven't walked in your shoes. They don't know what makes us who we are. I mean, each one of us could probably do a 5-hour show on our life.
Right.
And it would be very, very different. And yet, God has seen fit to bring us together today. And I'm grateful for that. I mean, I've learned a lot. And thank you so very much for sitting down with us and really and truly being a vulnerable guy. I believe that the only way men can really learn how to be real men is to be vulnerable to life and let God change them, turn them, move them, transform them into what he wants them to be. And when that happens, we become what he wants us to be. And I'm honored that you're here with us today.
I appreciate being invited, talk about my life. It's great to have brothers. I didn't have any brothers growing up, but I had an awesome uncle, but it's great. I believe there's a purpose and a reason why God brought me to Houston.
Yeah.
God I didn't want to come here.
Yeah,
Him and I had those talks.
he did it so you could have the B&B treatment. Why don't you close this out, Bill? Bill, Bear.
Man, I really appreciate your guys' fellowship, and your mentorship. I mean, this really is a tribe. We talked about tribes before. We talk about that all the time. Man, hard times don't last, but hard men do.
That's right.
And man, you've certainly lived, you certainly had more than your fair share of pain. And that's one thing that really resonates with me. I wear this stuff. It's called Sin Eaters Guild. And a sin eater is somebody who eats other people's sins, right? So other people can live in happiness, right? And we all knew the road that we chose when we were taking this road. And we knew, we maybe didn't understand it at the time, but we kind of knew that it was going to be rife with hardship, right? With pain, with suffering, just so our families could live and be happy and be safe, right? And that's the one thing we all have in common.
Yeah.
Chris, I thank you today, brother. Chap, always a pleasure.
Yeah.
Yeah. So after this, I'm gonna go home and lick my wounds.
Yeah. Well, hey guys, that brings the end to a really fantastic podcast today. I hope you'll watch the whole thing. If you didn't, I hope you'll rewind and watch the whole thing. Share this with your friends. Subscribe to the channel. We're going to be here consistently talking about life, and it's our pleasure to hear your story. So feel free to make some comments. Only nice ones. We don't read the ugly ones. And we'd love to hear things that you might want us to talk about, and we'll look it up. Bear, it's been another great time. Thanks a lot for being here.
Appreciate you, Chap.
Chris, appreciate you.
Thank you, both of you.
All right, guys. We'll see you guys next time.
Thank you.